The courtroom was unusually quiet that Tuesday morning. Camera lights hummed softly as they captured what would become one of the most watched moments in Providence Municipal Court history. Behind the defendant's table stood Sarah Martinez, a 34-year-old elementary school teacher, her hands trembling as she clutched a manila folder filled with medical bills and past due notices. Judge Frank Caprio looked up from his papers, his kind eyes immediately noticing the woman's distress. This wasn't just another traffic violation case. This was a human being in crisis, standing before a judge who had built his reputation not on harsh sentences, but on understanding the stories behind the citations. Sarah had received multiple parking tickets outside Rhode Island Hospital, where she had spent countless hours visiting her critically ill mother. Each ticket represented a moment of desperation, a daughter choosing between proper parking and rushing to her mother's bedside. Now facing over $800 in fines, her teacher's salary already stretched thin by medical expenses, Sarah found herself in a courtroom known for its compassion, but uncertain of what fate awaited her. The gallery watched as Judge Caprio adjusted his reading glasses and looked directly at Sarah. In most courts, this would be a simple matter: pay the fines or face additional penalties. But this was Judge Caprio's courtroom, where humanity often trumped bureaucracy, where understanding mattered as much as enforcement. "Ma'am, before we begin," Judge Caprio said softly, his voice carrying the warmth that had made him beloved by millions of viewers worldwide, "I want you to know that whatever brought you here today, this court is a place where we listen. We don't just see citations, we see people." Sarah's eyes welled up at these unexpected words of kindness. She had entered the courtroom expecting judgment, but was met with genuine care. The folder in her hand seemed to weigh less as she realized she was standing before a judge who saw her not as case number 47B, but as a human being with a story worth hearing. As the cameras rolled and the courtroom held its collective breath, no one could have predicted what Judge Caprio would discover about Sarah's situation, or how his response would remind an entire world that justice at its finest is inseparable from mercy. Sarah Martinez had never imagined she would find herself standing in a courtroom. For 12 years, she had dedicated her life to teaching third graders at Central Elementary School in Providence, earning a modest salary that she stretched to cover her basic needs and help support her aging mother, Elena. Sarah was the kind of teacher who bought supplies with her own money, stayed late to tutor struggling students, and treated every child in her classroom as if they were her own. But life had taken an unexpected turn 6 months earlier when Elena was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis came like a thunderbolt on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, transforming Sarah from a dedicated teacher into a full-time caregiver overnight. Elena had raised Sarah as a single mother, working double shifts at a textile factory to put food on the table and ensure her daughter could attend college. Now it was Sarah's turn to be the caretaker. The reality of Elena's condition meant frequent trips to Rhode Island Hospital, sometimes multiple visits per day for treatments, consultations, and emergencies. Sarah would rush from her classroom the moment the final bell rang, her mind racing between lesson plans and medical updates. The hospital's parking situation was notoriously difficult, with limited spaces and expensive daily rates that quickly added up. On her teacher's salary of $42,000 per year, every dollar mattered. As Elena's condition worsened, the trips became more urgent and frequent. There were nights when Sarah received calls at 2 a.m., racing to the hospital in her old Honda Civic, her heart pounding with fear that she might be too late. In those moments of panic and love, proper parking was the last thing on her mind. She would pull into any available spot, sometimes in loading zones, sometimes at expired meters, because every second mattered when it came to her mother's care. The parking tickets began accumulating like autumn leaves, first 1, then 3, then 7. Each citation was a reminder of a crisis, a moment when Sarah had chosen love over law, desperation over protocol. She kept them in a manila folder, planning to pay them when she could, but Elena's medical expenses consumed every spare penny. Insurance covered some treatments, but the copays, medications, and additional care expenses created a financial burden that seemed impossible to bear. Sarah had applied for financial assistance programs and even started a small GoFundMe campaign, but the help was minimal compared to the mounting costs. She began skipping meals to save money, wore the same professional outfits repeatedly, and gave up small luxuries like her monthly haircut appointment. Her colleagues at school noticed her growing stress but didn't know the full extent of her struggles. Elena passed away on a rainy Tuesday in February, just 3 weeks before Sarah's court date. The woman who had sacrificed everything for her daughter's future was gone, leaving Sarah not just grief-stricken but financially devastated. The funeral expenses, final medical bills, and accumulated parking fines created a perfect storm of financial crisis. Standing in Judge Caprio's courtroom that morning, Sarah represented thousands of caregivers who face impossible choices every day. She was a dedicated professional who had never broken the law, never caused harm to anyone, but found herself labeled as a repeat parking violator because love had guided her actions more than legal compliance. Judge Caprio had seen many cases over his years on the bench, but something about Sarah's posture, the way she held herself with dignity despite obvious distress, caught his attention immediately. He noticed how she carefully organized her papers, the way she respectfully addressed the court clerk, and the genuine remorse in her eyes. This wasn't someone trying to evade responsibility. This was someone who had been crushed by circumstances beyond her control. In most municipal courts, Sarah's case would have been processed in minutes. Read the charges, impose the fines, set a payment plan, next case. The system is designed for efficiency, not empathy. But Judge Caprio had built his reputation on a different approach, one that recognized that behind every violation was a human story worth understanding. As Sarah prepared to explain her situation, she thought about her mother's final words. "Mia, always remember that good people sometimes find themselves in bad situations. That doesn't make them bad people." Elena's wisdom echoed in the courtroom as Sarah faced a judge who was about to prove that justice and compassion could coexist. The stage was set for a moment that would remind everyone watching that the law, at its best, serves humanity rather than simply enforcing rules. Sarah's story was about to intersect with Judge Caprio's philosophy in a way that would touch hearts around the world and demonstrate why he had earned the title of America's Nicest Judge. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair and studied the case file before him. 8 parking violations over 6 months, totaling $847 in fines and fees. On paper, it looked like a clear case of someone flagrantly disregarding parking regulations. But Frank Caprio hadn't become beloved worldwide by judging only what appeared on paper. He had earned his reputation by looking deeper, by seeing the humanity behind the infractions. "Miss Martinez," he began, his voice gentle but authoritative, "I see here that you received 8 parking citations over a 6-month period, all in the vicinity of Rhode Island Hospital. Before we discuss the legal matter, I'm curious, what brings someone to the hospital so frequently?" Sarah's composure, which she had carefully maintained since entering the courtroom, began to crack. Her voice wavered as she spoke. "Your Honor, my mother she was very sick. She had pancreatic cancer, and the treatments." She paused, struggling to find words that could adequately describe the nightmare of watching a loved one slowly slip away. Judge Caprio noticed her struggle and leaned forward, his expression softening. "Take your time, Miss Martinez. There's no rush here." The courtroom was unusually quiet. Even the court reporter seemed to pause, sensing the gravity of the moment. Sarah took a deep breath and continued. She needed treatments 3 times a week, sometimes more when she had complications. "I work as a teacher, so I would rush over after school, and sometimes I got calls in the middle of the night when she had emergencies." "And these tickets," Judge Caprio said, reviewing the dates, "they coincide with your mother's treatment schedule?" "Yes, sir. The parking at the hospital it's very difficult. Sometimes I couldn't find a legal spot, or I didn't have enough quarters for the meter, or I was just so scared that she was—" Sarah's voice broke completely, and tears began flowing freely. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. I know that's not an excuse. I know I broke the law." Judge Caprio removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture those who knew him recognized as his way of buying time to think. The courtroom waited in complete silence. This was the moment that separated Judge Caprio from countless other municipal judges across the country. The moment where he chose between mechanical application of the law and recognition of human circumstances. "Miss Martinez," he said finally, "how is your mother doing now?" The question hung in the air like a prayer. Sarah's shoulders shook as she whispered, "She passed away 3 weeks ago, Your Honor." The impact of those words rippled through the courtroom. Several observers felt their eyes well up, and even the court bailiff, a veteran of thousands of hearings, looked away momentarily. Judge Caprio sat back in his chair, processing not just the legal implications of the case, but the profound human tragedy it represented. "I'm very sorry for your loss," Judge Caprio said, his voice carrying genuine sympathy. "Losing a mother is one of life's most difficult experiences. Can you tell me about her?" This was unexpected. In most courts, personal details are irrelevant to parking violations, but Judge Caprio understood something that many in the legal system had forgotten, that justice without humanity is not justice at all. Sarah's face brightened slightly despite her tears. "She was everything to me, Your Honor. She raised me by herself, worked 2 jobs to put me through college. She was so proud when I became a teacher. Even when she was sick, she would ask about my students, worry about whether I was eating enough." Sarah managed a small smile through her tears. "She would have been so embarrassed that I got all these tickets. She always taught me to follow the rules." Judge Caprio nodded thoughtfully. "It sounds like she raised a good daughter. And you're a teacher. What grade do you teach?" "3rd grade, Your Honor, at Central Elementary." "That's wonderful. Teaching is one of the most important professions in our society." Judge Caprio paused, then asked the question that would define this moment. "Miss Martinez, if your mother was here today and she could speak to this court, what do you think she would want me to know about her daughter?" The question caught Sarah completely off guard. She had prepared for legal arguments, payment plans, and penalties. She had not prepared to honor her mother's memory in a municipal courtroom. Through her tears, she spoke from her heart. "She would want you to know that I tried my best, Your Honor, that I loved her with everything I had, that every one of those tickets represents a moment when I chose her over everything else, including my own financial security. She would probably also want you to know that I teach children every day about doing the right thing, about taking responsibility for their actions. And she would want me to pay what I owe and learn from this." Judge Caprio sat quietly for a long moment, the weight of Solomon-like wisdom resting on his shoulders. He had the power to enforce the law strictly, to add another financial burden to an already grieving woman. Or he could choose a different path, one that his years of experience had taught him often served justice better than rigid rule enforcement. The courtroom held its breath as Judge Caprio prepared to render his decision, unaware that his next words would be shared millions of times across social media platforms and serve as a reminder of what justice could look like when tempered with mercy. Judge Caprio looked directly at Sarah Martinez, his decision crystallizing in his mind. In that moment, he embodied everything that had made him not just a municipal court judge, but a symbol of compassionate justice worldwide. His next words would demonstrate why millions of viewers had fallen in love with his unique approach to the law. "Miss Martinez," he began, his voice carrying the weight of both authority and empathy, "let me tell you what I see when I look at this case. I don't see a parking violator. I see a devoted daughter who put her mother's needs above everything else, including her own financial well-being. I see a teacher who shapes young minds every day, someone who contributes to our community in immeasurable ways." He paused, allowing his words to sink in throughout the courtroom. "These tickets represent 8 moments when you chose love over convenience, when you prioritized what mattered most. In each instance, you were responding to a crisis, rushing to care for someone who had spent her entire life caring for you." Sarah listened in amazement, hardly daring to hope for what his words might mean. "Now, legally speaking, I could enforce these fines. The law is clear about parking violations, and there are consequences for breaking those laws. But I've learned something in my years on this bench that law school doesn't always teach us. Sometimes the letter of the law and the spirit of justice don't align perfectly." Judge Caprio turned to address the gallery, knowing that his words would extend far beyond the courtroom walls. "You know, we live in a society that often feels increasingly cold, increasingly focused on rules without context, punishment without understanding. But sitting in this courtroom day after day, I've learned that real justice, the kind that actually serves our community, requires us to see the whole person, not just the violation. He turned back to Sarah. Your mother raised you to be responsible, to follow the rules, to contribute to society. And look at what she accomplished. She raised a teacher, someone who dedicates her life to educating our children. That's not just following the rules, that's building the foundation of our future. The judge's voice grew stronger, more passionate. Miss Martinez, I'm dismissing all 8 parking citations, all of them. You owe this court nothing except to continue being the person your mother raised you to be. The courtroom erupted in applause, something that rarely happened in municipal court proceedings. Sarah collapsed into her chair, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude. Through her tears, she managed to say, "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you so much." But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. He stood up from his bench, a gesture that elevated the moment from legal proceeding to human ceremony. "Miss Martinez, I want you to know that your mother is watching over you, and I believe she's proud of the daughter she raised. You honored her by being there for her in her final months. Now I want you to honor her by taking care of yourself." He reached into his own wallet and pulled out several $20 bills. "This is from me personally. I want you to take yourself out for a nice dinner. You've been through an ordeal that no amount of money can fix. But sometimes a small gesture can remind us that there are people in this world who care about strangers, who believe in the goodness of others." The gesture was pure Judge Caprio, unexpected, personal, and profoundly human. It transformed a municipal courtroom into a place of healing, a moment that reminded everyone present why they had faith in humanity. As Sarah walked toward the exit, Judge Caprio called out one final time, "Miss Martinez, keep teaching those children. Keep showing them what it means to be a good person. That's how we make the world better. One student, one act of kindness, one moment of understanding at a time." This moment captured everything that had made Judge Frank Caprio beloved around the world. It wasn't just about dismissing parking tickets, it was about recognizing that behind every case file was a human being deserving of dignity and understanding. His approach reminded viewers that the legal system, at its best, could be an instrument of healing rather than mere punishment. The video of Sarah's case would be viewed millions of times, shared across social media platforms with comments from people around the world who found themselves restored by witnessing genuine compassion in action. Teachers wrote to thank Judge Caprio for honoring their profession. Adult children shared their own stories of caring for aging parents. People facing their own financial struggles found hope in the reminder that sometimes kindness prevails. Judge Caprio's legacy wasn't built on harsh sentences or strict enforcement of regulations. It was built on moments like this, instances where he chose to see the person behind the paperwork, where he recognized that true justice required both law and love, both accountability and mercy. In a world that often felt divided by anger and judgment, Judge Caprio's courtroom became a sanctuary where humanity triumphed over bureaucracy, where understanding mattered more than efficiency, and where every person who stood before his bench was reminded of their inherent dignity and worth. Sarah Martinez left the courtroom that day not just free of financial burden, but renewed in her faith that good people still existed in positions of power, that compassion could still be found in the most unexpected places, and that her mother's legacy of love and sacrifice would continue through her own actions as an educator and human being. Thank you for watching this tribute to Judge Frank Caprio. His courtroom reminded us that justice isn't just about enforcing rules, it's about recognizing the humanity in every person who comes before the bench. If his story touched you, please share it with others so his message of kindness and fairness can continue to inspire the world. Judge Caprio showed us that real justice happens when we choose to see people as more than their worst moments, when we remember that behind every violation is a human story worth understanding. In Sarah's case, those parking tickets weren't signs of disrespect for the law. They were evidence of a daughter's love for her dying mother. May we all carry forward Judge Caprio's legacy by choosing compassion over judgment, understanding over condemnation, and humanity over bureaucracy in our own lives. The world needs more judges like Frank Caprio, and more importantly, It needs more people willing to see the good in others, even in their most difficult moments.